Retro.
Hi, this is Claudia Gray, the author of several Star Wars books, and you are listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. May the Force be with you.
Hello, and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode will feature a discussion of Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss by Stephen Barnes. But before we get into that novel, Jay, where can we be found around the internet?
All right, Dennis, easy to find us. We are on Facebook and Instagram very conveniently at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the dish is aligned, the signal's boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, and we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, like I just said, we're going to be discussing Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss. This was a novel that came out last fall by Stephen Barnes, who previously wrote The Cestus Deception, which is now a Legends book here. It's going to be a full spoiler discussion. We hope you've all had an opportunity to read the book and can participate in this with us. Just a quick summary of what this is about. It's set after the Phantom Menace. Qui-Gon has died, but he left a message with basically a mission for Mace Windu to head out to this planet of Metagos and attempt to liberate it from some various crime lords that have infested it. And we'll get into more details as we go. But Jay, what did you think about this book overall?
Overall, I had trouble getting through it sometimes, I'm not going to lie, but I guess the best way that I can put this is, for me, it was a good kind of deep dive character analysis of Mace Windu. And we got to pull back the curtain, quite a bit on some of the inner workings of Mace. But I will say there were some things that I don't know if I felt were super consistent with what we know of his character. And I'm hoping that as we discuss this, I might be able to reconcile some of those kinds of things. Overall, it was enjoyable enough novel for me, but I'm not going to lie, I was a little confused at times as far as what the true purpose of some of the things that were going on in the story were. And there were some things that I was a little confused about and just didn't really sit quite right with me. But I mean, in the end, it was, it was like I said, just a very interesting character analysis of Mace Windu, I think is the best way that I could put it. But what were your overall thoughts?
I think you gave a really excellent answer to that. And your answer, I think, is going to outline a lot of our discussion here. I'm with you. I think this was maybe an average Star Wars novel or so. I did my usual whisper sync on Audible and Kindle and listened to some of it and read some of it. I thought I didn't catch the narrator's name, the guy who did who read it, but I thought he did a great job doing Mace Windu and doing the voice work for this and reading it. But I found I was having much more trouble following what was going on when I was listening to it than when I was reading it. And had it on Kindle and was flipping through the pages that way. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One, it's a brand new planet. Fine. Star Wars gives us new planets all the time. But there was some Star Wars imagery. At one point there's one of the ARC fighters from the High Republic. There's some High Republic references in here, which is pretty cool. And then, we get a Rodian in here, and we get some other species that we know, but there's also new aliens, new species, new planet, new factions, and things like that frequently were hard to follow, especially with some of the Force type mysticism things that were going on here. Plus, we had Mace struggling with some dreams in his past. He kind of has an interference with his connection to the Force. And trying to make out all this stuff at the same time, I was like, wait a minute, which insect-like species are we talking about right now? And what's going on? And so, yeah, I mean, if it's one of those things where wish I had just read it through the entire way and then maybe gone back later and listened to it on Audible. Just because if like I wasn't getting something, it would be much easier to flip back a couple pages and look for that explanation of what something was in a paragraph than it was to, go back 15 seconds, go back another 15 seconds, go back forward 45 seconds or whatever it is
Right.
on Audible for this. So, you know, I kind of looked on both Goodreads and on Amazon, and this is fairly well reviewed. A lot of people seem to like it. It just didn't work as well for me as a Star Wars story.
No, I would totally agree with you. And I found myself, like you said, I was hitting the 30-second back button to try to re-listen to some things. And finally, I just decided, okay, I have a basic understanding of what's going on with, all of the different clans in this whole silk production thing and why they were going to war and who Chulak was, which we're going to get into all that, I know. But
Mm-hmm.
honestly, most of it for me was, again, just the whole Mace Windu, side of things and the focus of that. I did like the way that the Force was explored in the idea of the web, because we've seen the Force being represented in so many different ways
Right.
across so many different types of novels. And, it is an entity that all types of creatures and societies need to interpret in their own way. So I really did dig that. And I have to say, one of my favorite parts of this entire novel was the whole culinary episode with Mace, which we'll talk
Uh-huh.
about, I know. So, I guess it was more the characters that I liked than the actual story. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Here's the other part about the story. It's like I was trying to decide what book this was trying to be because it's a Star Wars book. It says Star Wars on the cover. It's got Mace Windu, who's a legendary Jedi Knight, Jedi Master, on it as well. And weeks and weeks ago, months ago at this point, when we got like the first excerpt, it was Mace Windu arriving at News Axis, which is this
Mhm.
capital city here on Metagos. And he's hidden his lightsaber. He's kind of disguised himself as, this wanderer, a mercenary type, and ends up going by the name Solver. And
Mhm.
he gets hired to, by each faction to do jobs and stuff like that. And it seemed very much like a scene out of a Western. He goes to a cantina and someone spits in his drink and then he, gets into a fight with them. And, he is that stranger wanders from out of town, which is also, this old samurai motif here.
Right.
And so, I felt like, okay, so we have elements of Westerns, we have elements of Kung Fu. We have this weird, I know you liked it, but to me, some of the Force mysticism was just weird. And so, going on at the same time, there's these criminal cartels that are, and so it's like, what kind of book is this trying to be? Is it supposed to be, a gangster thing set in Star Wars? Well, we kind of got, they're calling themselves pirates. Well, we just got pirates in Skeleton Crew. Is it leaning into the Western angle? One of the things that happens in this book is that, Mace essentially creates or sees to the organization of all the citizens of News Axis to fight the different criminal cartels here. And so it kind of reminded me of the, Seven Samurai, Magnificent Seven type things where he leads the citizens into an uprising against the crime lords, which, I saw that mentioned a number of times. I think it even comes up in Stephen Barnes' acknowledgments at the end of the book here. And so I don't know. I just felt like it was trying to be too many different things
Mhm.
at the same time.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth. And I think as much as I applaud Stephen Barnes for trying to blend so many
Mm-hmm.
different types of things, it was just a lot. And so some of those things kind of got lost. And as much as I did appreciate him bringing things in from, even like Zygerian slave traders and like you mentioned the High Republic and then the different types of genres of with westerns and samurai and that type of thing, it did end up just being a little bit too much.
Yeah, and one last point I want to make about that is just like it just reminded me of too many other things that were going on in science fiction, fantasy, space fantasy, and stuff like that. For the worn out Jedi motif. At one point, Mace has these dreams about his childhood,
Mhm.
and it kind of interferes with his connection to the Force. And so, like, okay, we just went through the whole burnout Jedi thing and the Last Jedi and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka. There,
Mhm.
that's been done a lot in the last several years. the Seven Samurai Yojimbo type thing been done in Star Wars a couple of times, in The Mandalorian, in the Clone Wars. We've seen that time and again. That one's come up, even some in Book of Boba Fett. Then there's a mycelial network. The fungus, the on this planet is all connected through this great web and these spider worms that are spinning this silk. Well, Star Trek Discovery has a mycelial network that ended up being able to be used across the entire galaxy for blink of an eye travel
Oh,
there. And
okay.
yeah, and then this is the one that really got me. Okay, Samuel Jackson is not in this book, but he is the character that portrayed Mace Windu. And we just had the Secret Wars series on Disney Plus not too long ago. There's a very different
Mm.
portrayal of Nick Fury in Secret Wars than what we were used to in the MCU.
Oh, interesting.
And now here we've got a different portrayal of Mace Windu than what we're used to in the Star Wars movies and shows. And that's not to say that characters can't evolve and that there can't be more to them beneath the surface, because it's not like we've had a ton of Mace Windu in canon to explore what's going on in his noggin here. But
Right.
it's just I just kept getting that vibe when I was reading this.
Yeah, yeah, and the thing for me too, and you know me, I love being able to pull back that curtain and get inside these heads of these characters and know what makes them tick. I'm all about the psychology of that. But
Mhm.
again, you know what kind of left me a little bit, I don't know, not confused, but I thought to myself, okay, like this is something that he went through, but yet, and obviously this was written way after Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, but you don't see any difference after having gone through all of these things in this book that he carries forward. Like you would have thought that he would have had a lot more empathy for Anakin after this,
Mhm.
and, I actually even went back, spoiler alert, and to the, for the end of the book, and looked at some of the promotion images of Mace from Attack of the Clones, and I was thinking, okay, is he wearing that necklace? Is he wearing a necklace? Because that would be the most cool Easter egg ever, that he got from Kinshan. And no. So,
Yeah.
it's like this is almost like a separate story in an alternate timeline kind of thing is the way that I'm kind of trying to reconcile this, but I know it's not because it's canon.
Yeah, he goes through something in this book. It's supposed to change him, but we never see any evidence of that change ever again. You're right.
Right. The dancing and the singing and the, being
Mhm.
able to go across dreams and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, so this leads right into the next thing we were going to talk about here, which is the portrayal of Mace Windu here. And right off the bat, we find out that he really kind of considered Qui-Gon a close friend, even
Hmm.
though that they had their differences there. And when Qui-Gon has died, he calls in a bet. They would play Djarik, and Qui-Gon beat him in a game, and the stakes were essentially that at some point Qui-Gon would call him in on something, and it happens to be this mission that they're doing. One, again, we don't have enough from this time period, I guess, to really judge this, but I never really got the notion that those two were friends. Not that they couldn't be, but they have very different personalities and very different ideas of what the Jedi should be doing and how they should be doing it.
Right, right. I never would have guessed that either because some of the even their philosophies are totally
Mhm.
different. With Mace even being the one to fully say that he walks the line between light and dark, and that was the whole how he even created Vapad as the type of lightsaber form. And that's just not Qui-Gon. But I mean, I also have friends that are completely different than me. I have friends that have never seen Star Wars. What? But,
Yeah.
it's so I mean, I guess there's that, but I'm with you. It is kind of a weird alignment of the two of them.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, it's one thing to have friends that have different interests than you, but it's they just have such they seem to have such different philosophies of following the Force and what the Jedi should operate and stuff like that. And they
Yeah.
almost kind of seemed at times, I don't want to say necessarily rivals, but at the opposite end of the spectrum on things. With
Hmm.
Yoda somewhere in between them. But
Yeah.
okay, then there is this. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, is it a full blown romance with Kinshan? She's the leader of this clan on Metagos, and News Axis called the Saad. And they're the ones that tend to the Hylians, which are these spider worms that spin this silk that Metagos is famous for. And there's some, they also have, they do this dream weaving where they go with these crystals and allows them to kind of create this dissonance between their mind and their body when they're dreaming, and they can kind of observe themselves and participate more actively in their dreams. It's really kind of bizarre, but he, like I said, he ends up have his dreams like there's an invasion. He doesn't realize it at first, and it's in fact the Hylians that create it, that set him, at ill ease with himself and his past, which we get to in just a second. I mean, there's a whole lot to talk about, I guess, with Kinshan right here. But, at the end, she kind of helps him work the whole way through it. And, she gives him that necklace only to take it back. She severs it. And Mason's like, what, is this like a divorce? And she's like, actually, yeah, you're considered my consort so that you could actually have a leadership position amongst my people, which, okay, Mace was technically married for a brief period of time here.
Yeah,
But
I guess that's the way to look at it. You're right.
yeah, I just again, I was, after they're reading this, is like, okay, so, it's not like they had some hot and heavy romance with any steamy scenes in this book. There's a few chaste kisses, really, for the most part, that go back and forth, but there's a clear expression of feelings between the two, and when they're parting at the end of the book, they're talking, they talk about, it's like, this is another galaxy and another time, maybe things could have been different. And she's holding a candle for him, hoping that he'll come back someday and all this. I'm having a hard time reconciling this with the Mace Windu we know.
Right. Right. And that's exactly one of the things that I was talking about. And you could tell very early on that this might end up being some sort of a conflict for Mace, because as soon as he meets Kinshan, there was an instant attraction.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of this little cat and mouse kind of thing throughout the book. And then it was very akin to even Anakin and Padme, with, Padme saying, I'm a senator, you're a Jedi, we can't do this. And obviously Mace and Kinshan were in two very different headspaces than Anakin and Padme, but you can see where, the two of them were able to say, well, all right, we have these other roles. But you're right. I mean, for Mace, that just seems way off character for him. The only thing that I can, explain that is that he got so caught up in everything that was happening on Metagos that he literally forgot himself for a time, because he did dive into some really arcane kinds of things. I mean, just the fact that he was participating in these dream weaving, so to speak, and, being able to, for me, it was almost like, oh gosh, is this like flow walking? Is this, do you
I know.
remember that from Legends?
Yeah.
And that
Stick
was
a
a
pin
big
in that, because
thing.
we're gonna talk about him and his dreams in here in just a second in a bit more detail.
Yeah. And
But
it was
yeah,
actually his ability to not sever himself, but his lessened ability to sense the force that actually saved his life at one point. And it's
mhm.
just, yeah, there was just a whole, pardon the pun, but web of things that happened that were surreal. And so it's kind of like what happens on Metagos stays on Metagos is the best way I
Yeah.
can put it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, the difference between him and Kenshan, and then, compared to Anakin and Padme, is that, you know, while he was there, he willingly kisses her, but he doesn't, like, make it out to be this big deal where, like, he can't lose her. He protects
Right.
her, but because that's what a Jedi would do, is they would, he would protect her, especially in the climactic battle with Chulak at the end of this. But it's not like him having the bad dreams about losing Kinshan and then, what must I do? Or trying to find more power so he can prevent
Right.
it, or trying to learn how to keep people from dying, that type of a thing. It's, he realizes at the end of the book, it's like, my mission here is done. It's time for me to go on my way. And there is no, like, if this was Anakin, it would have been like, you should come with me. Right. I mean,
Sure.
he
Yes.
would have been trying to figure out how to work the
Attachment.
system. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, he totally would not have been able to let go of that attachment. So, that's fine. I mean, I think that technically works. It's just that, I don't see him being approving of what Anakin and Padme were doing at all. And not that he ever really knew about it before he died or anything. The closest he came was when Anakin said, you can't kill him. I need him. Paraphrasing
Mhm.
in Revenge of the Sith here.
Mhm.
But I just, again, it's just kind of, it's kind of hard for me to buy that, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being too rough because I'm thinking, Obi-Wan and Duchess Satine kind of had a
Sure.
thing. So,
Right. Right.
we've seen in the High Republic with
Yes.
Avar and Elzar as well, and
Mhm.
they're much more involved than Mace got in with Kinshan. So maybe I'm just being unfairly hard on him, but still, he just doesn't strike me as the type.
Yeah, to have such casualness. But again,
Mhm.
as you pointed out, you were kind of leading into my thought too, and not to belabor this and talk about Kinchan the entire time, but there were, it wasn't unlike any Jedi to have these sort of, very brief relationships, and they had talked about that a lot. That there was
Mhm.
a difference between having attachment and just having fun. And that's been mentioned even in Brotherhood and several other novels too.
Yeah. The Master and Apprentice book, I think, as well.
Master and Apprentice, that's the one I'm thinking of, not Brotherhood. Yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that book is written by Claudia Gray, and she does like to write her Jedi romances, doesn't she?
This
Um,
is true. Good point.
right. Right. Okay. So let's talk about the dream a little bit here. We're on the subject of we're halfway through this episode, and we haven't got through as much as I thought we would. But so he has this dream. It goes back to his childhood, and it's like his childhood self is confronting him over his decision to join the Jedi Order. And I, I I'm having a hard time understanding what the confrontation was, to be honest with you here, because it's like his younger self is mad at him and this decision
Mhm.
here. And he's having to, Kin Shan is giving him some advice about this, leave him a gift, leave him some food, and eventually he'll come to you. And he's got it, and like it's the same person. What are we talking about here that's going on? But I want to put kind of that aside. We find out this past for Mace. He was a very small child, like a year old, when he and his parents were essentially out on a picnic, and they get attacked by these, I think they're called Gower bears, and his parents die defending him.
Mhm.
And Mace kind of accepts this all very stoically, even at 1 years old. He's like the bad MFer.
Yeah.
Sorry
Right.
if you have little ones in the car. Don't explain I'm not going to say those words out loud. But the in the car, I'm presuming people are listening to this car. But after that, he was kind of presented to the Jedi, and he went along with that. So I guess I don't know. Did you pick up on exactly what the conflict is with all that, or I just was not paying enough attention?
Well, for Mace, what I understood was that he was trying to figure out if his parents abandoned him and willingly gave him up, or if it was a choice on his part, which I think is very interesting because coming again from Anakin's point of view, Anakin chose to become a Jedi. So as
Right.
you pointed out, Mace was so young when this happened, and then he was presented with this choice. Like he had three different things to choose from, and his elder and his village, they had this thing that looked like the tube of a lightsaber hilt, and then they had something else, and it was whatever called out to this child was what his path would be. And it's kind of like, well, okay, he's 1 year old, of course he's going to go for the shiny looking toy. But
Right.
aside from that, at least it was for Mace able to reconcile the idea that he wasn't abandoned, he wasn't given up, and he was actually wanted. His parents died as heroes, saving his life, and it was a choice that he actually made.
Yeah.
So that's what I got from it.
That's a good explanation. That's a good explanation. I like that. And then you also touched on the pod, and we know it is this fighting style that Mace Windu developed, and it's kind of dangerous. It's not for everybody because it does take you to the darkness in order to use it. I mean, you kind of surrender a little bit to that, but you also have to be able to bring yourself back to the light. There's a bit of a tightrope walk that's happening with this. And so, there's several times where he uses this technique in here, and And I thought this part of the book was actually clever. It's like he knows he shouldn't enjoy this, like,
Yeah.
looking forward to the upcoming fight and that type of thing. But part of him is, and he acknowledges that, and then he like shuts it away, which I think is very in keeping with Mace Windu. He's got
Yes.
these techniques, he's got these skills, he knows there's a cost and a danger to using them, but he's aware of that, and he is appropriately careful when doing so.
Absolutely. And again, there's I know I keep talking about Anakin in this and his, experiences with Anakin, and he was actually trying to teach Anakin some lightsaber skills, and Anakin wanted to learn them, and he was all about it, and he just wanted to jump in and just go right at it. But there was another kind of interesting parallel between those two characters as well, because when Mace was getting ready to join the tribe, one of the things that was said to him was that ordinarily we would say, "You are too old to join," but
Yeah.
they were gonna let him do it. So I was like, "Oh, that sounds like Anakin too." So, again, I keep saying that, but I would have thought that he would have had more empathy for Anakin after this, but obviously he didn't.
Well, not only that, he seemed to have some rather fond memories of Anakin.
Right,
Period.
he did. Yeah, you're right in this book.
And
Yeah.
not only did Anakin want to learn Vapod, Mace actually taught him a little bit of Vapod there.
Mhm.
And you know, it was not just Mace; it was the entire Jedi Council, and Yoda was big in
Sure.
that decision as well. That didn't want to train Anakin. That he wasn't going to be trained. But and maybe Mace was one of the ones that voted for Anakin after the at the end of Phantom Menace for that him to be trained. We don't know, or at least I don't, not
Right.
aware if that happened or
Mhm.
not. But by the time you get to Revenge of the Sith, you kind of see, now there's some things that happen in Revenge of the Sith that might have caused all of it, but you get the sense that Mace doesn't particularly trust Anakin. And in
Mm.
fact, he tells him as much. It's like, if what you told me is true, then you will have earned my trust. When he's
Right.
talking about Darth Sidious. And but here they are, it's like this kind of seems revisionist, a little bit, reflecting on this relation. I don't want to make too much of this because it's not that big a portion of the book,
Right.
but still,
Exactly.
it just was one of the things that jumped out at me
Me
when I was
too.
reading it. Yeah,
Mhm. And again, I was all about the character study of Mace more so than anything, so
sure,
what
sure.
stood out to me.
Okay, well, we should probably move beyond that so we can get to a few of the other things before we have to wrap this episode up. But the big villain in this book is Chulak, and it's actually a union of two beings. We have Chu, who is a Faraki, which is brand new to this book, and
Mhm.
Locke, who is a Rhodian. And then they are joined by some sort of organic bridge between the two that's made out of bone and muscle. I almost need to see a picture of this because
Right,
there was
exactly.
several times I couldn't figure out exactly how that union worked, because they frequently are described as like, this creature has four hands and four arms, but then they make sure that they mention this flesh bridge between the two, and how Chu offered this arrangement to Locke and Locke accepted it, and so they kind of can think together. They frequently speak in unison when it's to their purpose not to. One will say something and then the other will say something, but they fight in sync. They have this it's kind of a triple piece nunchuck thing almost, called a Sanchi Khan, that they're
Mhm.
absolutely terrifyingly deadly with on that. But anyways, this creature here is in charge of half the criminal uh, half the criminal syndicate here in New Zaxxas, and the whole silk trade that's going on. What'd you make of Chulak?
I really liked this introduction. It was just funky enough for me to be able to be like, "All right, I'm digging this." Even though it was creepy at times. I mean, the voice just in and of itself reminded me of, at least in the audio version, there's a
Mm-hmm.
Jackbox game called Murder Party, and it's like the narrator from that. Have you ever played those games on Jackbox? They're
No,
like
I'm not familiar with that one.
they're video party games, and so it was
Okay.
like, "Oh my gosh, this is like right off of that game." But at any rate, I thought it was pretty clever because I liked the idea that there's this species that can willingly conjoin themselves and create a new being, not really like a Siamese twin all the way, but yet, still even retain some of their individuality as much as possible. Almost said humanly possible, which is not exactly possible, but and then they can continue to join. So I'm really curious because they wanted Mace to join as the third because they really
Yeah.
appreciated everything that he did and just thought that he was worthy enough. And like you brought that up, like they were worthy, that I would be really interested to see if there is a being that has several of these creatures can join. Like how far does it go? How many can join with them? Is there like a maximum, like 15,
Well,
20?
you would think at some point it's no longer practical. I mean,
Right,
it's
exactly.
just you know, because look, I mean, I suppose if you go through this process of one of these aliens and you bond this way, it quickly becomes second nature to you. You're always
Sure.
aware of this other being that's attached to you and stuff like that. But how do they lay down in a bed? I mean, how do
Right.
they, it's, I just, how do
You
they even
can't
get
do
dressed? I
anything.
mean, how do you pull a shirt over your head? I mean, it's just a lot of, that type of stuff occurs to me. And at some point it's like, one's company, two's company, three's a crowd. I mean, how many minds are we, or, I don't know. It just is, like I said, I could see a symbiotic relationship between two. Beyond that seems like it would be way too complicated, and for it to be practical and work. But it is an interesting creature, very unique, and I did appreciate that uniqueness here. The combination of the two gave them, a fighting prowess that was enough to defeat Qui-Gon when he was
Mhm,
there on that planet.
mhm.
And then the two minds working as one allowed them to comprehend things much quicker than a lot of people could. So that was kind of interesting. Before we get too much further on Chulak, I want to talk about his counterpart on the planet, which was Sybil, which is an insect species. And in this case, she had mated with another of her kind like really, 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 really long time ago, and has been since able to just lay like an endless number of eggs ever since. She's got children in the hundreds here,
Right, right,
and they're numbered by when they did something, not necessarily by their birth order, but and the order in which they did something to prove themselves to
right,
earn a
like a
number
rank
here.
order. Mhm.
Yeah. And Mace ends up killing one of them, one of the Sybil's children, as a mission for Chulak. And that was interesting because he goes to this, goes to a cantina and he ends up gambling with this thing, and then this one of Sybil's kids, I can't remember what they called them, siblings, cheats. Mace catches him in the act, and it kind of provokes interaction in which this thing dies. And then all of its siblings, Sybil's children's siblings, say that 3 times fast,
Yeah, exactly.
end up, whenever they see him, they like do this foot stomping thing and they challenge him to a duel. And so Mace is constantly fighting these things. They're all trying to avenge the one that was killed here. But the point is that, Chulak runs one half of the criminal syndicates that are on the planet, and Sybil and her kids run the other half of all this. And
Mhm.
caught in the middle of all this are the citizens of News Axis that are kind of suffering under all of it.
Yeah, yeah, and, the first time, though, that Mace ends up killing the one sibling, he goes to Sybil and says, "Oh, yeah, your son." She's like, "Oh, yeah, he was always a clumsy one," or whatever. Anyways, it's almost like she didn't okay, I have a million children, so, yeah, that
Yeah.
one was so, we kinda figured that was gonna happen anyways, sort of thing. But,
Yeah. I'll
yeah,
miss him.
that
I've got
whole
60 to take his place. So,
right, exactly. And
yeah.
so that was kind of crazy, but there was in some ways I was like, "Okay, is this again kind of a Lady Proxima sort of a thing?" All I could think of was this
Yeah.
worm. And so I don't know, like, is there any I don't know what Lady Proxima was. I mean, I'm assuming she was also in a crime organization,
Not one of
obviously.
these.
Right, she was a white
Yeah.
worm kinda thing,
Hmm.
but it wasn't the same thing, but I was like, "Hmm, this kind of reminds me of that kind of organization," but she didn't have, like, children like that, but, yeah, that was kind of a crazy setup for that there was just all these children, and they were rank ordered, and they were just basically literally survival of the fittest, and whoever could
Yeah.
outrank the others.
So Mason's up working Chulak and his faction against Sybil and her faction. And, he does a raid at one point, I think on behalf of, see, it gets confusing on times. He does a raid on a train carrying silk from one place to another. I think it was silk, doesn't matter. And it's on behalf of Sybil, but then, it creates discord in Chulok's organization. Like someone on the other end was cheating him. And so anyways, he provokes things to a crescendo here. And then Chulok invades Sybil's home and kills her and like burns all of her eggs at the time. And then her oldest surviving child, Sybil 4, was a male, starts the process of converting to female so that he can take over and continue, the organization. So that was kind of interesting. But that's the big conflict in the book, because Mace has got to figure out what to do. And he's one Jedi here, and he finds allies along the way. The setting here is cool. I mean, New Zaxxas is inside this gigantic cave with these crystal stalagmites and stalactites that are, making these pillars. And then some of the silk that the spider worms are casting are used to like hold up this giant palace that Chulok lives in above everything. I thought the setting was pretty cool. In fact, it was one of the best parts of the book, as far as I was concerned. It sounded like an incredible environment that would be cool to like visit in a video game or something.
Oh yeah, yeah. The world building, I would say, for the most part, was pretty cool. Just the idea of this big geode is the way that not to be confused with Geode from the High Republic, of course, but that you could have all of these different sorts of factions of society that were operating at the same time. And like you said, the silk is the main driver of the economy and everything going on. But it's very specific the way that the silk is not only created, but also in the way that it is refined, because they were saying that it actually didn't have any really like value until it was refined. And all I could think of was, wow, like I wonder where else in the galaxy these kinds of things could have been used, or were they used? And, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if Padme ever had any of these silks woven into any of her, gowns and that type of thing and whatnot. And there was, quick aside, there was a mention that Chulok was wearing armor created from a Zillo beast. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did. I thought that was an interesting touch. I didn't realize the Zillo beasts were common enough and had been defeated enough in order to make that possible.
Right, exactly. So I was like, oh, that's an interesting little Easter egg I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I didn't put down the notes, and I thought that, yeah, okay. Interesting development there. So,
Yeah.
I feel like we're shortchanging Chulok and Sybil and them, but like you said, this book really is about Mace Windu and kind of his journey through it there. Yeah, one other character that I want to talk about is the Maya droids.
Yes.
There were 3 of them here in New Zaxxas, and they're described as holo droids. And I'm not entirely certain what that means, other than, they frequently perform for the patrons that visit this one particular cantina. They have multiple functions, and when they shift from one function to another, they internally replace like one chip with another one. And while they're doing that function, they don't really have all of their memories from when they're performing a different function, which leads one of the Mayas to be taken advantage of, and she ends up stealing some eggs on behalf of for one of Chulok's minions here. So there's that. But I kind of thought those were fascinating characters. How they could just like keep changing their functionality and be useful in all those different types of ways.
Yeah, and they were very endearing too. I kept calling them in my head like the Holo sisters, because they were just, they were all kind of part of this little family. And but yeah, and especially the name Maya just sounds very sister-like to me, I guess. But yeah, I'd love to see some photos of some of these, renderings and things, because I'd love to see what they look like. Because I don't know if there's, do we have any other holodroids in Star Wars that make an appearance anywhere else?
No, I don't think so. And because they talk about how there was 20 of them total, and they're down to these 3. That something happened to the other 17, and Maya 12 nearly gets destroyed. in this book. So it would have been 2 of them that were left at the end. So I don't think we have holodroids anywhere else, but I'm willing to be wrong on that. So if
Yeah.
anyone's listened to this and knows, let us know. That'd be fantastic.
Well, the only other thing I could think of is maybe like a training droid. Would that be considered a holodroid?
I
I'm
don't
wondering.
I don't think it's
Not
just
to
the ability to
belabor
use
the
some
point, but
yeah, I don't think it's like necessarily just the ability to use a hologram that makes them the holo droids in this
Mhm.
situation here. I think it's their functionality, the diversity of things that they can do, and their personalities and stuff like that. It seems like a very particular thing. And there was a point that Barnes was making with these droids that I'm not entirely certain I got, but they became good friends. Especially with my 12, I think.
Mhm.
Mace Windu over the course of this entire book. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll
mm.
tell you what, while you were just talking that, I went ahead and Googled it, and the most famous one we know is Proxy. Galen Merrick's was a holodroid.
Huh, okay,
So there you go.
interesting.
And there's a
Yeah,
picture of it here as well. So I see you learn new things. Love it.
indeed, indeed. Okay, well, we kind of answered the last 2 questions already. What we kind of thought of the book. If it's, how do we think of this as a Star Wars story, and do we feel like we understand Mace Windu better? And I feel like I understood him in this book by the end of it, but
Right.
I'm not, to you, as you pointed out, I'm not sure it really changes what I think of him at all outside of this book, because I just don't see necessarily, like you said, this is a book where he's got a conflict and he's supposed to evolve and change over the book, but if he did, that change doesn't appear anywhere else. You would have thought you would have been seeing a different character between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and
Mhm.
I don't know that we did. So
Right. Right.
yeah.
Like I said, what happens on Metagos stays on Metagos. But I have to say, I hope that he actually does use his little new, Dreamweaver ability to potentially visit Kinshan again in his dreams. I'm a romantic at heart. What can I say?
It's a problem for the Jedi. They have this rule against this very thing, and then all of them end up developing a romantic attachment somewhere.
I
So
know. It's human nature. What do you do?
right, right. Okay, then. Well, that will do it for this discussion of Mace Windu, The Glass Abyss. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust. And we hope you've enjoyed the discussion. And if you did, and you want to hear us discuss other novels in the future, we discuss most of them, not all of them. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice so that those will get downloaded for you automatically. And once you've done that, we greatly appreciate your ratings, reviews, and the like on your podcatcher that supports such things. And if you want to catch our entire catalog of shows, including all the reviews of the various books that we've discussed over the years, one of the best places you can do that is at retrozap.com. Jay, you want to go ahead and remind everybody what our social media contacts are and where else we can be found online?
Sure. We'd love it if you would connect with us. We are very easily found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust. And we also have tons of Pinterest boards. And another way that you can contact and connect with us is on our YouTube pages or channels, I should say. So we have our traditional YouTube as well as YouTube Music. And both of those do support reviews and not reviews, but sharing, and subscribing and all those things. I guess they do reviews on there too. You can hit the little thumbs up button. But let us know what you thought of this discussion, and we would love to hear your opinions. And we would also love it if you would support us by purchasing something from our TeePublic store. So we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of things, from t-shirts and sweatshirts to coffee mugs and home goods and everything in between. So hit up the link in our show notes, and it'll take you right to where you need to go.
All right. You want to remind everybody what you got going on in cosplay?
Sure. So right now I'm gearing up for Fan Expo Cleveland, which is going to be towards the end of March. And so you can check out my Instagram at j.snipscosplay for all the updates there. And I will be pulling out my fourth sister for that. So I'm really excited for that. And then you can also catch me as Ahsoka, 2 different versions of Hera, as well as my original concept Mandalorian, and a few other things sprinkled in there in between as well. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay on Instagram.
Okay. Upcoming on the show this Friday, it's our weekly look at Star Wars news. And then on Monday, we are continuing our discussion of the Clone Wars with a look at episode 2 from season 2. So make sure you join us for that. But thanks for listening to episode 856 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with